to an extent, the studios are co-opting some of those filmmakers' instincts by creating these secondary means of production. Like Sony has its own art division, which is Sony Classics. 20th Century Fox has Fox Searchlight, which is run by Lindsay Law, who's a very fine executive and was himself a producer for American Playhouse for many years. So each studio has kind of evolved its own little fine arts area where they maybe can make these films on much lower budgets with lower expectations for commercial return. But you know, they're always, when it's a studio doing it, you know their secret hope is that it's going to be the full Monty, that they're going to get a small film that they make for $10 million or less and then has this huge breakout commercial potential. I remember there's an idea that is definitely an independent film kind of idea that I've been nursing for more than 20 years. It's a biographical film about Emma Goldman, who was one of the great radical political figures of our century. Probably the most disturbing radical female character in America's history almost. She was very nearly convicted of the McKinley assassination. She was implicated in an assassination attempt on Henry Clay Frick, who ran the Carnegie Steel Company. She was arrested and deported for counseling draft resistance in the First World War, which was very unpopular. She preached birth control. She preached free love, an end to marriage, the 8-hour workday. Just too radical. And she was deported to Russia, where she was too radical for Lenin. Lenin kicked her out of Russia because she was too irritating somehow. So she's a great character, but of course studios do not want, she's an anarchist, and no, studios do not want to make films about anarchists. First time I submitted it to a studio, I got a rejection letter that said, these people may be your heroes, but they're certainly not ours. So, but over the years I've kept this thing alive. I've even had drafts of screenplays written. I pitched it at Disney, which was like the most bizarre kind of pitch meeting you could imagine. So this is a very radical idea. And I remember once I called Handmade Films. George Harrison, the former Beatle, had a company with a man named Dennis O'Brien, who I think funded most of their projects, at least the development. And they'd done some pretty interesting small films. And I thought, well, yeah, these guys are hip enough to get this and political enough. And so I called Dennis O'Brien's office, cold. I didn't know him, and you know, his assistant recognized my name, put me on the line immediately with Dennis. I was thinking, oh yeah, cool, this is cool. Dennis O'Brien's going to talk to me, and I start telling him. He says, well, yeah, Harold, what do you got? You know, and I start telling him my idea about Emma Goldman. I could just hear his face kind of falling, and his okay. And he said, well, frankly, you know, I was hoping you had something more like Ghostbusters. So here's a serious independent film company, and like everyone else, they're hoping for some kind of blockbuster idea that they can use to fund, you know, lots of small films. You know, money's hard to come by. You know, ideas. I won't say ideas are easy to come by, but there are a lot of great ideas around for films. When I want to be inspired, I just pick up a history book. You read the history of any country or any period, and you will find movie stories, you know. I remember I picked up a book called The People's History of the United States, written by Howard Zinn, and I was amazed to find that there were not one but two slave mutinies on ships. One, the Amistad, which got made into a serious film by Steven Spielberg, and another called Creole, which I thought was actually a more interesting story. So before I ever heard about Steven Spielberg and Amistad, I started developing this idea for a movie about a slave mutiny on the Creole. And then found out, you know, when I was finally ready to try to launch this idea, that not only was, you know, it written, but, you know, it was going to get made by Spielberg, which is pretty daunting to go up against that. So I'm saying there are plenty of great ideas, you know, both fictional and historical, but not a lot of money. It's very hard to raise money to make movies. So, you know, that becomes like the real challenge for the filmmaker, is to, you know, how do you find, you know, the needle in the haystack? How do you find that one producer somewhere, you know, who can raise the $2, $3, $8, $10, $15 million, however, whatever you need. We can't all go to Miramax to get these films made. And I've always taken the easy way out. My ideas tend to be much more accessible and a lot broader in a certain way, and have tend to have big audience appeal, because part of my intent is to try to reach everybody with, those very corny American kinds of movies that I grew up on, that I still seem to want to make. So studios, continue to fund what I do. I haven't had to, with the exception of Edmund Goldman, I haven't had to go out and shop these ideas to independent producers.